Our next topic is Chapter 12, which involves inventory management. So let's get started. So, why manage inventory? Basically, it's one of the most expensive assets of almost every company, often representing as much as 50% of the total invested capital. What operations managers have to do is balance that inventory investment with customer service. So, in essence, what that's saying is if we take money out of inventory, so lower the level of inventory, we'd have that money to invest in other things, which could have a higher return, etc. The bad thing about doing that is that we may not then be able to meet customer expectations or customer demand because we have lower levels of inventory. So we have to balance between meeting customer demand and making sure we don't have too much money tied up in inventory. There are four broad types of inventory that we have to be aware of. There's raw material, work in process or WIP, WIP, finished goods, and MRO, which stands for maintenance, repair, and operating. So the raw material stuff that we've purchased but haven't actually done any processing on yet, haven't started adding value to it. Work in process has undergone some change, but it still needs to do other things. Maybe we've cut it, we've put it together, but we haven't painted it or we haven't packaged it yet. And then we have finished goods, which is the completed product awaiting shipment. And then finally, MRO, the often overlooked category of inventory. This is the necessary stuff to keep machinery and processes productive: oil, lubricants, etc., light bulbs, things like that. So there are different functions that inventory can actually help us use. So one is to decouple, which means separate, various parts of the production process. And what that does is basically if I have a production process that first the product has to be cut, then it needs to be sanded, then it needs to be painted, then it needs to be put together. Then at each workstation, I can have work in process built up in front of each one of those workstations. So if, for example, one of the first things in the process of cutting, if the saw breaks, if I have inventory, work in process, sitting in front of the other workstations, then those workstations can stay busy while we repair the saw so we can start cutting again. Second function, decouple the firm from fluctuations in demand and provide a stock of goods that will provide a selection for customers. So here that means having enough stuff on the shelf so that customers find what they want when they want it. We might buy inventory in larger quantities, which we'll look at a quantity discount model later. So that's one reason we might hold more inventory, and we might also hold more inventory to hedge against inflation of different things that might come up in the economy. So there are two ingredients to help us manage inventory. We first have to know how to classify inventory items, and then we also have to maintain accurate inventory records. So in order to help classify inventory, we have this thing called ABC analysis. It divides inventory into three classes, often based on annual dollar volume. Class A is high annual dollar volume, Class B medium, and Class C low annual dollar volume. Then what we do after we've separated these inventory items into separate categories, we establish policies that focus on those few critical parts instead of the many trivial ones. We might do ABC analysis on something other than annual dollar volume, things like quality problems, so I go back to chapter 6. High unit cost, so maybe we're not turning it over a lot, but each item costs a lot of money, or maybe even delivery problems. So here's an example of ABC analysis. Here we're showing about 15% of our inventory items make up the A items, and that's a good rough estimate for what usually happens in real life too. And they take up 80% of our annual dollar volume. Then we have the next 30%, there are B items that takes up about 10 to 15%, and then the remaining parts, the remaining 5% there are C items, which we see are the large majority of the little piddly things that we're not too concerned with. So again, what we're going to try to do is come up with some policies to put more emphasis on, for example, supplier development for A items, making sure that we get the quality stuff in, making sure that they're getting there on time. We also might want tighter physical inventory control for those A items, especially if we're doing high unit cost ones. And then we also would probably want to be a little bit better at forecasting. So if you've taken Business 370, you learned a lot about time series forecasting. So you might want to take more care in forecasting for those A items to get a better idea of what the demand is going to look like. And then the second part for managing is the record accuracy. Accurate records are very critical, making sure that we know when to order, how much we have in stock, so we know when to order or reorder. It allows us to focus on what's needed. It helps us make precise decisions about the scheduling and the shipping and the ordering. And then we want to make sure both the incoming and the outgoing record keeping is accurate. And then in order to make sure we don't have shrinkage or pilferage, the stockroom should be secure. So no five-finger discounts for the employees.